Chapter 5. A Rescue. Bess was already running pell-mell down the hill, her flashlight pointing the way. "Come on, hurry!" she cried out. The other girls seemed mesmerized by the strange figure. Miss Drew insisted that they leave, and finally they followed her. Nancy was last in line. She turned to look back. The green apparition was gone. Nancy was puzzled. How had the man accomplished such an instantaneous exit? She asked herself. Of course, he could have turned out the light surrounding him. But what about his clothing, which definitely had glowed with a green hue, even in the dark? "I'm coming up here again in the daylight to find out what's going on," she determined. When the group reached Mirror Bay Bide-a-Wee, they were relieved to find the cabin untouched. To be sure there was nothing explosive or otherwise dangerous, they searched every inch of the place, inside and out. They did not come upon anything harmful. "That sorcerer just wanted to get rid of us," George said in disgust. "One thing is sure," Nancy remarked. "Yo, Karen, and all of us have seen the green man, so we know he does exist." Bess spoke up. "I wish he'd go out of existence, and the sooner the better." The climb up the mountainside and the quick descent had given everyone an appetite. They enjoyed a late evening snack of cheese and fruit, then went to bed. Nancy was first to awaken the next morning. It was still early, but instantly she thought of the figure that might be gliding across the water. "Maybe I could see her more clearly this time," she thought, and hurried out to the porch. The mist was not so heavy as the previous day, and she could plainly see a woman with graying hair and wearing white slacks and sweater moving across the water. When Nancy looked more intently, it occurred to her that the figure was not gliding, but walking. The stranger kept going out deeper and deeper until the water reached her knees. How far is she going? Nancy wondered. As the young detective continued to gaze, the woman suddenly lost her balance. She went down under the water. Nancy waited for her to reappear, but there was no sign of her. Something has happened, Nancy decided. She raced from the porch across the strip of beach and through the shallow water. Still, the woman had not reappeared. The impact must have knocked her out, Nancy thought worriedly. In a frantic lunge, she shallow dived at the point where the woman had gone down. She could see her thrashing with her arms, but unable to rise. Nancy rushed toward her and now realized that the woman was wearing knee stilts. One of them had caught between two rocks. Nancy yanked at the stilt and pulled it loose. To her horror, the woman had stopped struggling. She was drowning. "I must do something quick," Nancy thought, realizing that soon she would have to go to the surface for air herself. Nancy attempted to guide the victim to the surface, but the load seemed too great. She knew she could not hold out much longer. At that moment, George appeared. She had come to the porch just in time to see Nancy go underwater, but failed to reappear quickly. Together, the two girls brought the woman to the surface. They towed her to the beach, and Nancy began giving her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. By this time, Bess and Aunt Eloise had come outside and hurried to them. There were anxious moments as the girls took turns giving the victim artificial respiration. Aunt Eloise had gone for a blanket to cover her. The stilts were unbuckled from just below the woman's knees. No one had spoken, but when the stranger suddenly took a deep, natural breath, they all sighed in relief. "Thank goodness," said Bess. The first aid treatment was continued until the victim was breathing normally again. Her eyelids fluttered open, but instantly closed. Aunt Eloise said, "Let's carry her up to the cot on the porch." This was done very gently and carefully. They watched the woman intently to see if she would show any signs of going into shock. She did not seem to. Instead, she fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. We can take turns watching her, Nancy said. In the meantime, let's get dressed and have breakfast. The woman slept peacefully, and Miss Drew thought it was not necessary to call a doctor. Breakfast over, the girls did the necessary housework, while Aunt Eloise sat on the porch with the patient. In the meantime, they had examined the aluminum stilts. They could be adjusted to a 6-foot length and had large square ends covered with rubber. I guess, said George, that on land one could walk indefinitely on these, but in the water, where there are uneven surfaces, it must be dangerous. As the woman found out, Bess remarked. I take it she doesn't know how to swim and dive, or she wouldn't have needed these. What do you suppose she was hunting for? Surely not that rowboat. I hope we can find out when she wakes up, Nancy replied. They went out to the porch and were just in time to see the near-drowning victim open her eyes and keep them open. She looked from one face to another in bewilderment. Everyone smiled at her, and Aunt Eloise said, You're all right now. You had a nice long nap. The stranger sat up, and it was evident she had regained her strength. She smiled at last and asked, You rescued me? They nodded and introduced themselves. Thank you very much. That was a dreadful experience. I shall never go near the water again. Miss Drew asked, Would you like some toast and tea? I'm sure that would taste very good. I do feel kind of weak. While Bess went to prepare the food, their guest told them she was Miss Anne Armitage, a retired schoolteacher. I'm staying in a little cottage on the west side of the lake. My reason for being here is to find something in this bay. Miss Armitage did not explain further. Instead, she told the group that as a child she had loved to walk on stilts and became a real expert at it. She had continued to practice. Since I can't swim, she said, I thought I'd use a stilt method for going into deeper and deeper water. I suppose I was foolish not to use a life preserver. I'm afraid you were, Aunt Eloise remarked. By this time, Bess had the toast and tea ready and brought it out to the porch on a tray. Miss Armitage seemed to enjoy them. As she finished a second cupful, color came back into her face. You are wonderful people, she said, and very brave, too. There is no way I could ever repay your kindness. Do you feel like talking and telling us any more about what you're doing? Aunt Eloise asked. Miss Armitage smiled. I suppose it's the least I can do for people who saved my life. She paused and looked off over the water. Then, as if making up her mind to something, she said, If all of you will promise to keep a great secret, I will tell you what I'm trying to do. It's a fabulous story. Each of her listeners agreed to keep the matter confidential and leaned forward expectantly as she began. End of chapter 5.